day, probably towards the end of the day for some of you. So I'm going to get started. My name is Laura Gilmour, and I'm actually from the University of Alberta in Canada. On Second Life, people often call me Eva or Zep. Those are animals in real life. I like to name things after pets and human friends and family members. I like connections. I'm a Ph.D. candidate in educational psychology, and I also work for an educational media firm known as Stairway to STEM, and I'm on the autism spectrum. This presentation will talk a bit about Stairway to STEM and also how to make educational media online, accessible, and engaging. Good topic for today's world, with many schools and universities having to rapidly go online to finish the year in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. This presentation will bring you into the world of diversity in STEM of all kinds, and maybe help bridge the techno shock gap for some of you who are scared stiff or baffled about how to go online and learn fast. We'll get started now. Autism in a nutshell. Many of you will have heard of autism. Rain Man, Good Doctor, Temple Grandin, Greta Thunberg's Autism State. Is it a disorder? A superpower? We're talking about a range of very different conditions. For instance, I attended a genetic seminar a few years back and was shocked that hundreds of genes may contribute. The main overlap between these groups of conditions that we can all agree on is that generally autistic people have these characteristics or differences. Differences in verbal and or nonverbal communication, intense fixation on certain subjects, behaviors, hand flapping, always talking about Minecraft, wanting the same supper every Saturday. Sensory processing difficulties, sometimes, or differences more so than difficulties, sometimes avoiding sensations, sometimes seeking others. In a nutshell, very different people with some overlap of traits. And yes, I do think there's some evolutionary benefits and drawbacks, and that's a whole other subject I'll get into sometime, maybe a future talk. Stairway to STEM. Stairway to STEM is an educational technology media firm which helps with the transition of autistic students from high school to post-secondary institutions. I'm a content creator for the website, and my boss is the amazing Jessica Murray, who is a valued colleague and huge supporter. It is funded by the National Science Foundation in the United States of America. Of course, the wonderful thing about technology is I'm up here in Canada, and I've worked for them for almost 2 years without ever getting on a plane. Some of the people know of my fear of flying. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. Stairway to STEM also has their own awesome website. As you see, I'm posting a link here, and you can click on it and see more cool stuff later on at www.stairwaytostem.org. where you can see some of the content my amazing colleagues and I have created. And I'll show you a little bit of that in this presentation too. One thing I love about STS is it allows a bunch of field experts and stakeholders to get together and share information. The website combines the wealth of knowledge from autistic students, parents of students, along with university professors and administrators. Another useful thing about STS is their different formats. Lots of choice. For instance, this podcast with one of my collaborators on communication style and supporting students is available in both audio and transcript. This supports many abilities and preferred styles. I'm going to post some of these links later. Remote learning today. Remote learning is a new thing for many educators, and the recent rush for instructors to go online with minimal prep in the wake of COVID-19 has illustrated the challenge of winging it versus experienced online teachers. However, I hope some of this infrastructure sticks around after the pandemic. As the speaker this morning spoke about an education revolution happening during challenging times, I think we're going to see a little bit of positive change as a result of us being forced to make changes as well. Some people have worked with pen and paper for years and take longer to feel comfortable with the change. But you can do it. Just don't expect perfection right away. Like I said to some of my colleagues at Stairway to STEM this morning, I said SL is complex software, and if you can't figure out how to log on right away, take some time and learn it. And this morning, logging into the YouTube channel is just fine. You'll still be able to access it, and I'll engage with your questions. Culture, neurodiversity, and adapting to preferred style. Communication can differ for many reasons. When working with students, instructors always have to be careful of format of feedback, and this is an online or offline thing that happens in every class at all levels. My supervisor, Dr. Veronica Smith, actually talked to me once about how different cultures give feedback, and she studied it in some of her work. She's at the University of Alberta in educational psychology. And she spoke of how some cultures are very blunt and direct when they're getting to a point and explaining a subject, and how some give long, big explanations and go off on more tangents and set it on a continuum. Also consider communication styles, and I've looked into this in my research as well. Some autistic people will struggle with eye contact, and that's very much an expected setting in in-person setting in many cases. Also, I consider that it's rude in some cultures or religions to look instructors in the eyes, and that creates some additional complexity in in-person settings. Some students may find virtual spaces easier to learn in, whereas some may prefer face-to-face. In any course, consider ethics of subject matter. For instance, if teaching an autism seminar, consider students on the spectrum maybe in your class. And keep discussions and subjects respectful and inclusive. I have a podcast later on I'm going to paste at the end that shares with one of my colleagues. Maybe we can get those links out later. But for now, I want to keep going. Communication style example. This is an example from a podcast I did contrasting my autistic campus experience with that of my friend, lifelong mentor, and collaborator, Dr. Malika Shalaman, who is a German immigrant. I am saying how I prefer direct feedback and find some things intended to be polite, misleading, or ambiguous. She responds by saying in her German culture, direct and blunt feedback is considered helpful rather than rude. Barriers to in-person attendance. Off the feedback loop and back to distant dad. No more tangents. This lovely podcast was with me and an Indigenous community advocate, Shalyn Blanchard. Another amazing friend, colleague, and advocacy collaborator who shares my values. She speaks of the challenge of going from a remote farming community to a city and struggling to learn the bus system. I speak of my challenges with perception and navigation and how it has put me in some risky situations in the past. Such as being lost outside when it was -20 and not even knowing what part of the city I was in. Or at a closed airport at 2 a.m. alone. If this conference wasn't online and was out of country, even pre-COVID era, there would be major safety concerns. This is my first time getting to speak at an out-of-country conference, thanks to technology and Second Life. Potential benefits of remote learning. I mentioned one personal story in the last slide, but here I'm going to be a bit more general with everything. You have control over the environment. For example, too loud, turn it down, too bright, you render flashing things. I don't see any of those flashing things anymore. But they're there for those who want them, and they won't drive me crazy with my sensory issues. In some cases, online classes may result in reduced absences. For instance, my sensory tolerance when I'm sick is very low. I'm actually getting over a nasty bug now, but I can often work remotely. But I end up with lots of absences compared to my peers for in-person things. Also, you can do some things with remote learning, like forum or group discussions, where people can delay response times and can still engage in discussion. For instance, group notices or note cards allow this in Second Life. If in real time, text chat may help some with those with issues with processing time, including those who struggle with turn taking in conversation. Also, nones tend to talk over people in a real time conversation or not talk at all, especially if there's a large group. Or auditory processing. Some people, if there's a whole bunch of sound going on in the background, they can't make out what's being said. Now I'm going to look at some of the drawbacks to remote learning. In some cases, visual impairments or sensitivity to visual stimuli can make things like SL a challenge. And that's why I also strongly advocated for this to be streamed to YouTube and mentioned some alternate viewers as well. For instance, some people may have difficulties with symbol recognition and reading text, for example, dyslexia. That may be a barrier. Vertigo or motion sickness, for example, moving an avatar around in a 3D world, or quick motion or flashing things. Photosensitive epilepsy or migraines, for example, all these lights in this room, and people who suffer from migraines, this may be a challenge for them. Nystagmus and abnormal eye movements can create some difficulties with trying to track text and keep up with text. Some people, for example, individuals with intellectual disabilities, they need to have physical stimuli in front of them and learn by doing, and that's sometimes a little bit harder in a virtual environment. Have that transferability where they'll be able to transfer that from the virtual world into the real world. And there's also reluctance and fear of online situations in person versus pen or paper. Worries about academic cheating, porn, or other things, even if dated misconceptions from the old 2009 documentary on SL that everybody talked about in psych classes back then that shows only the negative side. I remember it being mentioned in every one of my psych classes back in 2010, the horrors of Second Life, and I hadn't even joined them. Making content accessible. Remember how in this last slide I mentioned people who are motion or photosensitive. Alternate viewers, which are mostly text, may help. I've posted a couple links. Here is a link to one to check it out. There's Radagast. Also, mobile viewers may allow people to view things on a smaller screen or in only text. These are a bit dated, but they may serve accessibility purposes. There's Lumia and Mobile Grid Client. Also, these mobile viewers can be viewed on smaller screens, which can sometimes help people who have migraines, nystagmus, vertigo, or even just no computer and just a phone or an old crappy PC, so they need to run SL off their phone. More ideas. All you innovative people. Teach users how to control their sensory environment, such as turn off flashing lights. Some technology exists, such as screen readers, and you can implement these into SL. A lot of talks like mine here, I provide a transcript of most of what I say. Also, a direct teleport to a talk or streaming to YouTube, as I have, may help people who are trying to figure out how in the world do I log into SL, or people with visual impairments or motor impairments who may have a hard time moving an avatar, or even a temperamental computer that just won't log into SL. And also for those teaching courses like chemistry, consider online sessions could be mixed with kits or supplemental materials that are mailed to the students if you're looking at distance ed. For example, in high school chemistry, they had some kits that were sent to students, but certain stuff you can't have here in your home. You don't want kids blowing up the house or college students blowing up the house. Also, student choice is good. Allow multiple ways to respond, and I think the person this morning really illustrated that well was Rob in his talk. And these are, I'm going to briefly mention some other software that's used for distance education. SL isn't the only place. We have all of these Skype, Google Hangout, Zoom, and several other video chat platforms and virtual worlds. Mix it up a bit and use more than one for your class. Helping educators new to remote education. I think it would be useful to have some Second Life mentors specifically for training educators and some directories of tutorials for instructors. Reduce the confusion a bit so infrastructure is more in people's faces and they don't have to go digging. Making lemonade, and here I'm talking a lot about the teachers dealing with the COVID crisis and professors trying to go online right away. Some situations involve winging it, but as this year, a bunch of teachers and professors are scrambling to go online to finish a term that ends a month or less from now, depending on where you're at. Some people are working half sick and self-isolating. Also consider situations where a professor may be asked to teach a course outside of their area. Yes, exactly, Beth. Such as a graduate TA teaching a course that they haven't taken and have to learn by the seat of their pants. Nobody expects perfection in these circumstances. No matter what, you will never make everyone happy. You've done a great job if the majority of your students are happy. Dispelling SL misconceptions. SL is like anywhere else online, and people can make anything. From educational content to the darkest of dungeons to anything in between. No need to be afraid. Sure, did anybody catch that typo in the slide? Let's see how awake we all are. Find the typo. At least the typo was not something inappropriate. Example right in front of you of imperfection in online teaching. And I've been winging it a month where I've been in a month where I've been semi-unwell, just got my voice back a week or two after coughing fits and laryngitis. So glad this wasn't last week, or you probably wouldn't be able to understand what I was saying and I'd be coughing nonstop. And things are still turning out pretty good. I bet nobody would even thought anything of the typo had I not mentioned it. Show me perfection in education, and I'll show you a unicorn. You're doing fine. Now into some ideas for using technology in the classroom like Second Life. And if you have high school classes, Linden Labs actually offers sponsored regions that will keep teens off the rest of SL. There are even discounts for educators right now. And I'm going to post a link here to some of the educator discounts that are going on for schools. Also consider sponsored regions using Second Life for drama classes or plays and taking advantage of special effects. Class discussions or debates on voice or text. And if you can script or code, hire someone to lab demonstrations. Or set up things to sort of be unique for your class. Some simulators and virtual tours also exist. From landmarks of real-world historic sites. One time I went on the tour of a former World Trade Center towers and was neat to see a replica, as I never got to see the real thing when it was there. And I've also seen a tornado simulation where they were able to demonstrate the physics. Also consider having students code or learn Blender or Photoshop to learn content creation. Note, sponsored regions can be used for age 13 and up for schools. General rated sims can have 16 and 17-year-old students on them. And for those watching the live stream, I will get to your questions at the end and a little bit during the question period as well. So none of you are left out. For students 18 and over, you can use any sim for your learning environment. However, I would advise against some for obvious reasons. Certain places you don't want to bring students. Question time. Now here's where we'll get to have some fun. As I'm going to say a little bit here, we're going to open the floor for discussions and questions. We're going to type the responses in local so everyone can see them and sort of have it on the same page. I'll speak on voice and let everyone else type. But I'm going to type in response to the YouTube comments. So first, we're going to start looking at course format. For example, for those of you who have taught online, let's hear your thoughts on what works best as timing and format of classes. Should you get everyone together at the same time? Should you have students work on their own and hand things in and respond in non-real time? That whole asynchronous or synchronous thing. How flexible on deadlines? And how much real-time interaction? We'll stay here for a minute or two and then we'll go on. I'm going to check into my stream and see if anyone's saying anything. Someone on the live stream just said they would give their students a half credit on quizzes if they ever caught errors. And I think that teaches students critical thinking and to sort of pay more attention to the subject matter. And someone on the channel just asked me to turn up the volume slightly, so I'm going to do that and see if that makes things a little bit better. Check here, see if we have any questions here in local. That's a great idea also. My instructor on seminar in autism would do that often, where we'd watch a video and then we'd engage in a class discussion on it. Or one time in my undergraduate human sexuality, when we were having a debate, the instructor got us to read several articles before the debate, and then we came into class and we were supposed to pick an opinion and form a debate on an issue. Sort of like what Rob brought up this morning about having debates and being able to debate issues and disagree on topics. Our class was able to have a successful debate on abortion without students insulting each other. I actually have a link I'm going to share from that amazing instructor talking about that debate that I'm going to post in local right now. Going to it. Debate in college STEM class and hot topics. Also, my other current supervisor taught a seminar on autism and often would have controversial autism subjects come up in the class, such as ABA therapy. And with me being a student on the spectrum in class, it created some interesting situations. And yes, that's a great idea, and often done in graduate school and in higher levels of undergrad. And I think could be done a little bit more with K-12 as well. I think we're going to move on to our next question now. And I'm just going to look and see if there's any more things on the channel. Okay, we're good. On to our next question. And we touched on this a little bit in the first question, but we can go into it a little bit further now. Group projects for students when you're looking at online virtual worlds. And some people mentioned some ideas here, such as things for facilitating debates and discussing videos in class. But if anyone has any more ideas, they can throw them into this one. I will also check the live stream to see if anybody is responding on the live stream as well. So I guess that is a great idea to have group build projects, especially if you're in classes teaching coding and other skills at the same time as historic replicas or other things. That could be useful in so many subjects, everything from science to history. And like Rob spoke of this morning, having multiple ways to represent things. One thing I loved about my high school AP English teacher, even though this wasn't online, is that she would always allow us to have multiple ways of doing a project. We could do a paper, we could do a diorama, we could write a poem, we could do a video. And she wanted to see, and she made us choose a different option each time to make us show we could demonstrate the knowledge in multiple ways. Okay, I see Debbie Jo here. In an innovative class, we discussed what had to come first on the development of the automobile of electricity. So the kids, you sort of have them thinking in a project and expressing their thoughts and sort of working about how things would go about in a logical, philosophical way, rather than just having them memorize how the car was created. I think that is great. And we're going to head on to the next question now, where we're going to look at students with disabilities and accommodations in remote settings. I'm curious about people's ideas and experiences and things they've run across. I've tried to accommodate for different things in this setting, including going on and being a bit of a nitpick about the light and saying, turn off those flashing lights. There's people that will give migraines or motion sickness to turn them off. I think as far as this, an instructor should let students know at the beginning of the class that they can come to them with concerns, just like in an in-person class, or have it in the core syllabus. Because if no one's able to report concerns, there's nothing that really can be done without knowing. And what is a good number of students that works in groups? I think it all depends on the project. I was in a graduate teaching and learning class, and they often divided us up into groups by tables of like probably 2 to 5. But I've also seen some whole class projects or things done well. Even things like university classes that use the clickers and have responses from like a couple hundred students and then discuss the responses as an entire group. Kiki, I see your question, and one thing I would be thinking is if you notice a student's not participating at all or seems to be not, handing in material or whatever the format, maybe ask them, is there anything I can do to help support you in this class? Ask them privately, and maybe students may not want to disclose a specific disability, but they may be able to say, this makes me uncomfortable, or sometimes even cultural differences can create a problem in a class. For example, in one of my graduate teaching and learning sessions, there was a young student who was from a culture where it was considered disrespectful to look at women. He was from Saudi Arabia, and he would always look down at his desk, and the teacher would take him as uninterested or being disengaged in the class. So she pulled him aside and asked about it, and he explained that it was a cultural difference and that this was considered disrespectful, and that's why he wasn't doing it. But I think if you notice a student struggling, ask them in private what they need to succeed in the class. And this is advice from, my employers and my lovely mentor who does a wonderful podcast series on helping students and figuring out what the students need. And this one was done like a year and a half ago. There's a series of 3 of them. I'm just going to paste these. I think this answers some of the questions, even though this is more in an in-person setting and about communication styles. But one of the things he says is if you don't know what the student needs, go to the student and ask. But I think I'll put a disclaimer on that. She means to ask in private, not in front of the class. And anyone have any other questions or ideas? I'm going to check the live stream also. Oh, yes, I see points on digital citizenship and game-based learning. May I ask what you mean by digital citizenship, Sal? You mean like cheating in virtual environments or bad sportsmanship or how to treat others? Can you elaborate a little bit? I'm asking that question from one of the questions from the YouTube channel where an individual, I'm going to paste a question in here so everyone can see it, because I think this would be a good one, but it needs a little bit more elaboration. Pasting it here in case anybody has any ideas on it. I'm going to paste this individual's response in the chat here so other people can search it. This is a topic that could easily be Googled and people could find some interesting things on, but it will go a little bit out of our scope if we keep on this trend. This explains it a little bit more in a term that would be more familiar to everybody here. So I'm just going to paste this. I think this is a really good comment and sort of elaborates in layman's terms. Different programs and different organizations differ in terminology, so it's always good when you use acronyms to spell them out and explain them, because even within technology and virtual learning, there's a wide variety of differences in how people describe things. People can even debate, for example, in autism, what's the best way to refer to autism. with some people wanting to say autistic and some people wanting to say person with autism, and debates between educators and self-advocates. And honestly, as a self-advocate and a researcher, it makes my head spin a little bit. And now we're going to go on to one more discussion question on remote exams and authentic learning, and then I have a couple little fun activities before the end. So I'm going to start here with remote learning and exams. A super unrealistic scenario was a closed book exam. Remote exam and expect everybody to listen and not to cheat. Does anyone think that's going to happen? Once again, that whole theme of imperfection and teaching, or I accidentally advanced that a speaker had, these things are going to happen, and your presentation is still overall going to go well. Don't be afraid to try things and be innovative. And does anyone have any ideas on remote exams, how to do with a final project or final paper in a way that would promote authentic learning? For example, one of the neatest things one instructor had for the students was to design our own exam question, and we were putting it together in a way that demonstrated our knowledge of certain aspects of the course. Or another individual that taught a course on youth and society had us write a health report on any specific issue with youth based on this Canadian magazine. Or in our research methods in psychology course, we got to do a research proposal that we would use for our honors project and a mock ethics application. Fully agree on that one. And also, I remember years ago, I'm not a big one on pushing handwriting in kids, but in grade 3, I used to be really pushed to go to the resource room and practice handwriting. And the teacher there said, you know, we don't want to use erasers because you want to keep your mistakes there on the paper that you learn from them. And that's one thing I noticed on academic Twitter and some of the pages, is a lot of instructors fear online learning because they fear technological errors. And they fear that if you make a mistake or say a word wrong or do something like I did a few minutes ago where I made the chat card go ahead, that somehow you've totally screwed up your presentation and it's irreversible. And everybody's going to walk away and say what a horrible presenter you are. Whereas in reality, they're probably not even going to remember that, and they're going to focus more on your topic. Now we're going to go on to our memory lane post. Okay, I'm just going to paste a comment from the live stream here. It looks like we got another question. The students with different abilities have similar or unique experiences with virtual worlds. I can see how a child with autism or ADHD may experience it differently. And I can speak as an individual on the spectrum that in some ways it gives me a little bit more chance to respond to things when I'm processing in text versus real-time processing. That sometimes I have control over the sensory environment, but also I think it's really individually dependent. Some people without direction can get addicted and into problematic behavior, or are more prone to being victims of scams or things by ill-intentioned people, or to make social mistakes and be in groups with other people with poor social skills and feed off of each other, or to learn maladaptive coping mechanisms rather than seek out real-life help. So there's some downfalls as well as good things. And it really varies on the individual and the situation. One thing that's really helped me is having family support and having, mentors and things in my real life that would give me feedback on some of the situations that I experienced, so I'd be able to think about things and learn from them. But did I go along perfectly and not get in any social trouble, even as a young adult when I joined in my 20s? Honestly, the answer is no. But did I learn from it, and did I make friends in the process? The answer is yes. Yes, and I've always had a fascination with virtual babies and pets and with children's stories, and have enjoyed writing since I was a child. And in SL, I ended up creating some characters that I eventually used in a children's book that I'm piloting in real-life classrooms. And the idea originally started in SL. which is quite neat. There's a story of a child adopted from Haiti and a child on the autism spectrum, and how they both struggled with the social culture of the school setting. These are all characters I made up, bots, not real people. But, a dynamic environment allowed me to create the idea and the concept, and now it's being tested in local schools with grade 2 to 6 students. And it's been quite a unique experience working in real schools versus online surveys and seeing how the kids respond to characters. And now we're going to take a little trip down memory lane. This slide, I'm going to paste this in local again, so we don't have the blooper. Does anyone remember? We're thinking way, way back to old software. If anybody looks back into the old days of technology, many of you guys here were students during the 90s or 2000s, and some of you long, long, long before that, as someone mentioned here, going to school in the 50s. So think about, for example, things like WebCT, which was on when I was an undergrad. Think about MSN Messenger in the 1990s. AOL. GeoCities websites, oh my gosh. Yahoo listservs. Those ancient encyclopedias before you could really search net for things, or it was a huge deal to play a movie on a computer. Thinking all these kids in school and getting to play with Crayola art in computer class. It was like Crayola rock, and all the kids used to be totally excited and waste time when they get to play with that app. Crayola rock. And gosh, I can't sing. And if a smart-mouthed child in your life asked if dinosaurs still existed in those times. Thanks, everyone. This has been a lot of fun. We don't have a lot of time left, and this is the last slide.